Hello again, welcome to RP-0 America. So here we are in 1.2.2, my first attempt to record here. I don't have every mod in place that I want to use, but hey, it's good enough right now to record. So I have accepted a new contract to do a scan of Mars. Also, this is a neat thing, I never really realized this, I'm sure most other people know, but apparently you can see which contracts are available to you, like kind of in their total, through this all menu, which is really cool. And it kind of tells you, say, what have you not done yet that's not allowing you to do certain contracts, for example, which is really neat. Let's see, yeah. Anyway, so it's just a neat thing. I'll look deeper into, but I hadn't noticed existed before until I saw somebody else in it use it in a video. Even people who kind of work on our realism overhaul and RP-0 don't know everything. So let's see. So there we go. So now you can see what I'm building. So I've installed Scansat, and I need to use that eventually to select better landing sites on the Moon and on Mars. So I've already placed a satellite in orbit of the Moon. It's a pretty simple action, and I'm going to throw something at Venus now. It looks like we're pretty close. I think I've got those timed out fairly well. I've got the one of these in construction, and also you can see a sneak peek of another thing that I'm building. I don't have the technology quite for it yet, because that's what I'm researching, and I kind of need space station parts to make a manned orbital laboratory, which I plan to do in 2 launches, and I'll discuss that in a later video. But for now, we want this to be built. So warp to complete. Yeah, so I guess a whole bunch of debris will be coming down, which is nice, but it's going to kind of slow things down early on in this recording. But it will make space less cluttered in the future, which is very nice. Alright, so I'm also using a different mod for Sim, Crash, yeah, I think it's called Crash, and I use a, I have to set it up again or save it better or something, but I created, oh no, I did save it. So I'm still experimenting to see what would be the right, what kind of seems very similar to what Kerbal Construction Time or whatever was handling simulations before was priced out at. Alright, so let's roll you out. And yeah, we've got a Venus window here. It's Scansat. It's just a basic probe that I plan to send to Mars and place into orbit, so it doesn't need a particularly heavy launcher or anything. Good question. I guess I do need to launch into the proper plane, so I may as well go to the pad now and fast forward to the appropriate plane. But I don't currently have like clouds installed or some of the other more complex and memory hungry bits of RSSVE. So you won't see any clouds on this launch, although who knows, maybe the launch will be at night. So I'm still going with I'd still kind of be fiddling with this in the background, this install and this series, and also in the transition over to 1.2.2, which still doesn't have an official release, but I can get around that as pretty readily by compiling my own code and getting various copies, and many people have heard of the the golden spreadsheet. So let's see, set as target. So I want to end up in that plane, because more or less, the Moon is in the plane with the other planets, so I find that to be a relatively straightforward way of targeting an orbit or a launch that kind of gets you in the same plane as the planets. Alright, let's just fast forward to when we have a low relative inclination relative to the Moon and, by extension, Venus, I guess. What is in orbit here? Oh yes, I've still left a couple of things in orbit. I wonder how long they'll stay up now. I did get rid of some debris, and I'm bringing this save over to 1.2. Ooh, it looks like we're going to have a daytime launch. Oop, I missed it. I'll fast forward to the next day. We had a launch scrub there. Alright, so next day comes around, 30, 20, 10, yep. Okay, so pretty close. So it's a pretty basic launcher here, because our payload isn't very heavy in and of itself. But yeah, anyway, in the background I've been working on all 3 branches of what I said I want to do in my RP-0 games. So there is Mars, the Moon, and low Earth orbit. And right now this will be kind of our first sortie out to Mars in this campaign. Think of it as we've kind of tentatively set the goal of putting people in orbit of Mars or on Mars, but now we're kind of starting the cheap development process for that. Ooh, and I've got shiny parts now. We've got reflections. What's the mod that does that again? Texture replace, I think. And there should be a release of an actual like 1.2 KSP 1.2 compatible version of FASA available relatively shortly. I'm giving. I've kind of tested as far as I want to test, and it seems pretty good. And some awesome people have made some given us some changes that kind of improved the compatibility and behavior in 1.2. Even the lunar lander legs, which I'll be using for my later missions. Oh yeah, I still need to adjust that. Probably in a lot of my old videos and in this, you can see the rocket exhaust is kind of broken up into these balls. And it's in part because of how I set the number of smokescreen particles to be lower. And so how fast they're coming out and how frequently they're being produced leaves those gaps further down. So if somebody, like, it's actually honestly not that difficult to fiddle with those or to change that, but I'll try to remember to tweak it a bit myself just to make it look better for my recordings. If somebody wants to spend more time on that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just need toolbar, smoke screen, and you can just kind of select an engine. If somebody's more curious about it, and then just open config, and you can really just change the numbers in here anyway. I'm trying to launch a rocket. All right, you can just kind of change the numbers in there to fiddle. If somebody's more curious about how to do that, whether just for themselves or, yeah, it'd be nice if they could help for those configurations for Realism Overhaul. I can definitely do a quick kind of tutorial video to show how to fiddle with those, because it'd be cool to have more plumes and stuff. You know, it's a relatively easy, straightforward system to learn, and you kind of tweak and make whole new plumes, not just, you know, different sizes, different shapes, etc., but actually, you know, different colors and everything. So it'd be nice to see more interesting plumes, even if they're not necessarily realistic or for Realism Overhaul. People can kind of use their creative juices for that. It's pretty easy to learn any one small bit of the Realism Overhaul tool, you know, all the tools we use to build it, and do something interesting for yourself or to share with others. All right. Let's see, the plume looks a lot better up here. I just don't kind of have the time or inclination to fiddle with this kind of the specifics of how the plume evolves from, you know, where it is on the ground to up here, because I really like the way it looks up here. It looks just fine to me. It's just near the ground. It is kind of separated out into those balls. Okay. Yeah, it's not. This isn't. I've made it a relatively forgiving launcher because it's been a while since I've kind of, you know, launched something and recorded a video, you know, something with permanence. Oh yeah, I probably will put this in a new playlist, I think. So I tend to do. I found that, well, what do they say? You know, I've already have two points, and if I do three, you know, it goes from being a coincidence to a pattern. So each time I updated KSP itself, you know, from a 1.0 version, like 1.0.5, I think it was, to just tip down a little bit to 1.1.2, and now to, I think that's what it was, and then 1.2.2. I don't remember what the old version was. Was it 1.1.3, whatever was the stable one? But, you know, each time I changed kind of the base version of the game I was using, I've gone and created a new playlist, started a new playlist. And I think, kind of interestingly, coincidentally, I have a similar number of videos in each of them as well. All right, so I usually kind of just drop it off around 6 Gs. You can see you get a huge change in the burn time. When you have a really light upper stage like this, it definitely pays to drop off the booster early enough that you're going to get a few minutes of burn time out of it. Just because when your upper stage is so light like this, in contrast with, say, if I was using a Centaur upper stage, dropping those off means you have a lot less dead weight while you're expending the last bit of this fuel. And so it has a substantial impact on how much delta V the Atlas actually delivers. In comparison, when you're using an Atlas Centaur, so you have a much heavier upper stage that also with much more efficient engines, those liquid hydrogen engines, it isn't as necessary to drop those engines off so early and have this burn for so long. And so, you know, somewhere between 6 and 7 Gs of acceleration is usually the benchmark I use for that. So let's just do a little bit of time warping. So if you're not sure what the MOL is, it's the Manned Orbital Laboratory, and you can look at the history of it, how it was kind of designed, and the Air Force, the United States Air Force, was considering using it as an observation platform for kind of surveilling the Earth, and it was a really cool concept. And so I am intending to make my entry into space stations with the Manned Orbital Laboratory. I'm doing it different than the kind of historical plan. So the historical plan was to use like a Titan 3M, I think it was called, the M for manned. So they're going to man rate, kind of a version of, all right, there we go, and turn on the engines. All right, so to man rate a version of the, basic, it's very similar to the Titan 2, except with the first stage is two solid rockets on the side that are ground lit together. They get the rest of the rocket up. They kind of act as a stage 0, if you will, for like a Titan 2 like vehicle. Anyway, they would use so that makes the whole launch vehicle a heck of a lot heavier than the traditional Titan 2 was, and so it can put a lot more mass into payload into orbit, something like, what, 12 tons, something like that. And kind of the intention was to use that and like have a Gemini capsule and a space station underneath it, and launch all of that together, a small space station with a Gemini capsule. And so the two people who are launched into Gemini would, once they were in orbit, would crawl through a hatch in the heat shield into the space station, since the Gemini doesn't have a docking mechanism like Apollo does. So they kind of they actually did test this in reality, and it found the concept to be sound and functional. Just changing that. In which the astronauts would crawl through a hatch in the heat shield back in 0G through to the space station, and they would spend time in the station, which in the for an observation device that had a kind of a big set of optics, it was a substantial part of the weight that was thrown up with them for taking photographs of the Earth, for surveillance, military, national security surveillance reasons, and they'd stay in space for a few weeks. I don't know what the expected lifetime of the MOL was in terms of crew activity in orbit, actually. But they'd be sent up all in one launch with all that hardware. And then when their mission was up, they'd crawl back through the hatch into the Gemini, and then they'd close the hatch in the heat shield. They would have the Gemini separate from the space station, and the Gemini would return to Earth, more or less as a normal Gemini would. And so I'm using a similar concept to that, except I don't like the idea of man-rating another rocket. Like, I do want to keep only a few rockets used for sending people into space. And you see Cuba over there. And so I don't want to make a Titan 3M, and so what I'm going to do is use a similar rocket to that to launch the space station into orbit, and then I'll send up a regular Gemini Titan 2, except with a docking system, so it can dock to the space station, and once it is docked to this, it docks through the rear end of the Gemini, very similar to the concept used for that single launch Titan MOL. Alright. Except I'll be doing it in 2 launches because I don't plan to use the Titan 3M, a large Titan with solids, for very much, because I have such an ambitious space program, where most of what we want to do is at the Moon, and let's see, Venus is our target. Maneuver planner, and we're doing oh right, of course, gotta unset, set again. There we go. Because we have such an ambitious program, we'll be using a lot of Saturn 1Bs and Saturn 5s, and both of those are already human rated. We've used those for human missions. They were used for human missions in history, and so I don't really feel the need to man rate another smaller launcher, because the Titan 2 is just such a great cheap launcher. All right, let's tell it lowest delta V and see what it creates. So it says 12 days in the future, so let's create that node compared to how much delta V we actually have. So we don't have a ton left in this. We don't actually even have enough to throw our craft out of the Earth-centric system. even towards the moon. But we have tons of delta V in this, in that other part. All right. So that gives us, it's kind of weird how it shows up, and we get these, getting these crazy twitches. I'm not sure what causes that. Yeah, nothing's ever perfectly stable. So let's see, focus view. So it says we're close, but if we actually zoom in, we see that we have a pretty close approach to Venus if we do that launch. So that's 12 days from now, we'd be shooting towards Venus, and we still had a probe in a very elliptical orbit around Venus, because that's, I think, the best we could do with the fuel we had there. All right, so we have that maneuver in. So now I'm going to use maneuver node editor, and I'm going to try a couple things. So one, I'm going to try to bump, ooh, well, that's not good. No, try to see if I can bump this earlier, you know, because that's 12 days out. So if I can bump it to closer to now, can I save any delta V? Would, you know, just kind of goal is an ideal, but not necessary. Or can I do it for the same amount of delta V that I'm spending right now? Weird. So the nice thing is I've got lots of delta V on this for a mid-course correction. Actually, this is a pretty good launcher or something if I wanted to put up a geosat, right? Because this could kind of do it, put me into GTO from where I am now, and then this could circularize or mostly circularize. I'd have to do a quick run of the numbers, but it's not too bad for that type of mission. All right, let's go back to 10s. Yeah, that's not getting me any closer. No, that is, actually. Not too bad at all. It's, I mean, it seems like it's a little useless to do this since I already had a transfer that gets me close. But there's some serious logic to the idea of getting it done with less delta V. So it's kind of like the feng shui of space travel, or you know, yin and yang. So if you can get something done, if your goal is I want to throw something towards Venus, the less delta V that it costs you, kind of the impact of that is generally that it's also going to take you less delta V to capture at the other end. So not only do you save delta V in sending yourself out towards Venus by being closer to an ideal lowest energy transfer, but you're also going to save energy on the flip side in making it easier to achieve orbit. So 3,500 meters per second, not too bad. Let's see, I know this is hardly having any impact there, but you know, that's just explaining the idea, the logic. All right, so, whew, right, of course, that still makes a huge difference. So can I? No, I'm going to go up that one. I'm going to go with this because that's really close. That's actually surprisingly, interestingly close to that. So there's another thing I'll want to do as a mid-course correction that I'll have to schedule. But I want to, because I'm trying to scan the the planet. Oh, and I don't have the clouds set up, so you get to see. You do get to see the kind of the fairly naked surface of Venus here. Generally, it's just so cloudy you don't see it at all. For some future videos, before we get to Venus at the very least, I will have got clouds working in this install. It just hasn't been a priority because I'm trying to kind of make sure that I have something to do in each of those three elements of my space program. So we're going to wait the 12 days. That's fine. We don't have anything that's boiling off, which is very important. I just find it so relaxing. It's like such a substantial benefit in playing RSS, Realism Overhaul, RP-0, with real fuels, wherever you kind of want to draw that line or state that. If you once you are in orbit, or once you're up here, you've done your transfer. If you don't have things that are boiling off, you just have more time and flexibility to do what you want. So if I'd been using an Atlas Centaur, I'd be losing a lot of my liquid hydrogen. I would not be able to wait 12 days to make this transfer. I'd have to basically say, okay, well, let's kind of head towards Venus right now and see what it's going to cost us, because even just waiting 1 or 2 more orbits would just eat a very substantial portion of our liquid hydrogen. All right. So we're producing energy. Good. Like when we're in time warp like this. So I want to, So I've had some trouble, and I'm sure other people have as well. Let's see, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what's causing that problem. That's not even the problem I was thinking of. Cannot quick save. Well, that's that's going to be problematic because I kind of need quick save to, in case I get crashes or be able to record videos. So that's a serious problem I'm going to have to solve for future videos. Let's see. So I want to warp to this maneuver node. Now 12 hours is what, like 8 orbits? So I don't just want to do individual orbits. So I'm going to kind of try to get myself pointed towards this node and hope that MechJeb doesn't cause me trouble. If I tell it to execute the node, I don't want it to just, crank up the engine. Good, it did not do that this time. That's comforting. And we're not losing electric charge, we're not running dry as we warp through time and space. It's telling me that, yes, close alarm. Oh, nice, and it even went back into time warp after that passed. That's awesome. It is limited to how quickly it can go through time warp because of our relatively low altitude. This is a fairly stable altitude for for a week or 2 weeks like this. If need be, if things were hyper realistic, we could go into like a 300 by 300 orbit or something, and that would definitely give us enough time to get up there. So 8 more days. All right, let's just let this tumble. That's making me a little dizzy. So let's just go into space where we don't have to look at that. Just the nav ball going crazy. So this launcher that I've used, because again Venus and Mars are relatively close to each other in terms of delta V, basically this exact same launcher, I just built another copy of this, and that's also what I'll be using to throw Scansat into orbit of Mars. Because we'll get a low resolution map of Mars, because I can just use Google to look for the lowest parts of Mars for when we throw our next landers and continue progressing our program towards Mars. But doing it in Scansat is nice, looks cool, they're cool missions, and it's more realistic. That before NASA wanted to put humans on Mars, or even like rovers or actual probes, they would do scans of Mars to get more information. You can see how elliptical this orbit is. The satellite that we currently have in orbit of Venus is very elliptical. You see, just swooped by, and elliptical orbits are fascinating because the satellite, whatever's in an orbit, has the same energy at all times. And so right now, as it climbs up, that energy is going into potential energy, and therefore its speed is slowing down. Kepler's equations in play. All right, so I don't remember if this engine needs to be ullaged. Let's see. It's not saying that the engine needs to be stable, so it's pressure fed, I think. And we're going to get throttle up soon. Man, I just love when MechJeb does this for you. Me and some other people have also been seeing this, where MechJeb will turn on the engine right when you tell it to warp to the node, rather than waiting the appropriate amount of time. And I don't know what's causing that. I think there's a pattern somebody noticed, but I forgot. I think it's if your engine hasn't been staged yet. I thought it was the other way around, but I did have this engine staged, right? This is the engine that got me into orbit in the first place. Also, for use as an interplanetary vehicle like this, I have left the hydrazine tank not completely full. And this hydrazine can also be used to complete some of the delta V that we don't have, right? We don't have, in this transfer stage, what is it, an Agena B or D, right? Agena D. All right, so in this Agena D, it doesn't have enough engine to run through the Bell engine, the Agena main engine, to complete this delta V. So we do have RCS on this. We have Cavia B and RCS quads, which will have pretty low thrust-to-weight ratio. But I can try using some of these little guys here. I mean, these are probably even weaker. 69 by, I'm not sure why it's two different numbers. Maybe that's just the max and the min. 69, but yeah, these ones are the same power. But either way, this Agena transfer is going to give us most of the delta V we need. But yeah, FASA is working well for me in this install because I've got kind of all the most recent changes. Let's tell it to abort node execution, see how it does. So we get a pretty small amount of acceleration, as you can see, a pretty small amount of delta V change we're having. So if we went, if we dump this, I always wish there's like a little cradle we could place between these two because it just looks so weird floating, but that caused trouble on some of my old craft files. So we're going to leave this behind. We're going to, there's not a ton of hydrazine in this anyway, and it's not going to give us much delta V, so let us just stage. So staging will drop the Agena, and it will start up those RCS motors. All right, that is a good point. I didn't turn those off. So that is technically thrusting as well, just not with this payload. Oh, weird. Why is it so it says, oh, right. Okay, so these RCS quads are on, but we also have this engine, which has a whole 1.7 kilonewtons. And so instead of using, oh yeah, I do need to leave the SAS on because this craft is a bit asymmetric. Extend the antenna because of that guy, I think. Ooh, that's probably not a good position to have it in. But yeah, that probably helps. We need the RCS on because this is off-center, the center of mass isn't straight down the line of thrust, and this engine, while they're great, they're infinitely, you can turn them on infinitely. I don't think they don't throttle, but they're pretty easy to use. These little dinky 1 kilonewton thrusters. But the RCS needs to be on to handle the asymmetric craft itself. All right, and so because this burn wasn't perfectly, it wasn't an instantaneous burn, that planned maneuver isn't going to be absolutely perfect. So let's just make sure, okay, we're set to SAS, we're not set to a node, so I'm free to get rid of this node when I'm ready. All right, let's just time warp a little. The time warp's going to waste a bit of RCS and causing it to correct and overcorrect, etc., etc. Oh, another cool mod, so I've got all kinds of mods. Let's see, so this will take a moment to populate. Science here now, so I just add that science. That's usually a thing that kind of wastes time or confuses me in actually capturing the science for RP-0, because I'm interested in kind of the alt history, not necessarily ensuring that I have enough science points in cache. But there's this guy here. So this is physical time ratio, and I don't remember exactly which mod it is. If anybody doesn't know and is curious, they can ask in the comments, and I can look it up. But it's cool because it actually tells me, like, this is the max physics frame time, and that tells me not just when this goes yellow, it tells you you're not running at full 1-to-1 speed, or 1 real second is 1 game second, but actually tells you what percentage speed you're running at. So very cool. I don't need you, so right click to get rid of that, and I'll just keep this open. So soon I should see my trajectory sweep in to the Venus system, I hope. Yeah, it looks like we're getting closer and closer, so I'm going to close this pretty soon because, oh yeah, so see, here's my actual periapsis coming down towards Venus. So we're kind of forcing ourselves to travel back along the direction, relative to the Earth, the direction it was traveling, so that we'll dip down from Earth down to where Venus is, closer to the Sun. So it's kind of a little off, where it looks like it's going to have us join up. I mean, ideally we'd hit where that periapsis is and where the descending node is, but maybe they will start creeping in that direction. So I can right-click on that, and those will be a little faded, but they'll still show up, which is awesome. I don't know if I'm going to have enough delta V to do a capture, actually. We'll find out, won't we, when we get to Venus. But there we go. We are now going to sweep through the Venus system. So let's see what kind of adjustments I need to make to get closer. Looks like I've actually thrust through, so 100 there. So basically everything that I hit is pushing me in the wrong direction. So it looks like that's as close as we're going to get right now without doing a mid-course correction. So I'm okay with that. We have a Venus flyby in 138 days, and I have 138 days to set up a mid-course correction. There we go. Here is the Earth. Where are we? Is this northern Russia or? Oh, right, backspace to focus on my craft. It's a safe button to hit in this view. And no, not even close. Papua New Guinea, whatever this area is called, just north of Australia, and then Japan there. So I'll just end this video, my first RP-0 of this install 1.2.2, and we will leave the Earth behind, the cloudless Earth on this day, since I don't have the full RSS VE suite installed. But yeah, we should have more in store in, we go, you can see Alaska there, Hawaii there, as we head away from Earth. And I think it will pull us out of time warp once, if there happens to be some science to grab. There's another neat thing. Let's see, because we have Scansat installed, there we go, because we were doing those orbits over Earth, but we weren't at a very high inclination, we actually have a map type altitude. Sure, let's do, this will be an altitude map of the Earth. So because these were the latitudes, right? These are the latitudes we were orbiting over. We weren't particularly inclined. This is the portion we ended up flying over in those 12 days, and so to test out Scansat on this craft, we ended up kind of Scansatting part of Earth. So actually, there might be some science to capture from that. Let's take a look. Analyze data. Yep, nice. A little chunk of science there to send back to Earth, because I've actually included what is a somewhat reasonable antenna here. Even though I don't have any antenna mods installed. Ooh, wow, that looks weird. Right, North America there. So let's just warp to the edge of Earth's sphere of influence, and then we'll end the video. Yeah, I've got more in store for Mars. I eventually intend to do some variant of Mars Direct, but with logical precursor missions, because you actually need to make sure you can create fuel and other resources on Mars in an automated fashion. And I'll be using Saturn V's for that, or advanced Saturn V's, with various potential, what do they call them? MLV, I don't know what it stands for again, I forget, but Saturn MLV variants were planned to make bigger Saturn V's, or at least Saturn V's with a heavier push. And that's what I'll be using to throw various components of my kind of Mars Directian mission towards Mars. So Earth is very tiny there now. We are way above geostationary orbit, and our speed relative to Earth has declined very substantially. So now we can eclipse it very easily with our craft. I'll leave you. So thanks for watching RP-0 America. Have a good one.